In the 2025 NFL Draft, the Jets selected two players they hope will be instant starters, and then a third player who may join them down the line as a starter. Let's talk expectations for the Jets draft class of 2025 today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Well, today we are talking about the Jets draft class of 2025. We're going to set expectations for the players the Jets drafted on the first two nights. There's a player who the team is going to try and develop into a starter over the long run. And then there are two instant starters, or at least two players the Jets will be counting on to be instant starters. So let's begin by talking about the top pick. It was, of course, Armand Membou, who the Jets selected 7th overall, a pick that receiving a lot of praise across the media, across the Jets fan base. Very difficult to find anybody who dislikes the pick of Armand Membou. We've talked about it on the show the last couple of days, just how logical it was for the Jets. A position, obviously, where the Jets had a hole, position the Jets needed filled because it's a critical spot, and a spot where the Jets were able to make an investment that could pay dividends in the long run, because now the Jets have a left tackle who is a second-year player in Olu Fashanu and a right tackle who's a first-year player in Armand Membou. And I think it's pretty clear that Armand Membou is very, very likely to start at right tackle for the New York Jets. I don't think it's a 100% lock, but what I would say is if Membou doesn't start, it's because he's played himself out of the role in training camp. And I don't expect that to happen. You know, sometimes you have like what's known as an open training camp competition. We essentially have two guys who are graded equally, and whoever plays better in training camp in the preseason wins the job. I think in this case, Armand Membou is going to be the presumed starter. And unless like he surprises us all by, not playing effectively and essentially forces the Jets to start Chukwuma Okorafor, Membou is going to be in the starting lineup week one. I think it would be very unlikely that anybody other than Membou, as long as he's healthy, is the week one starter at the right tackle position. And Membou is a very important player for the Jets in his rookie season. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. If you look at this Jets team, you have a quarterback in Justin Fields who has potential. A guy the Jets are kind of looking to be a reclamation project in the mold of, some former Jets who have had successful career turnarounds, like a Geno Smith in Seattle or a Sam Darnold in Minnesota last year. Jets are kind of hoping that Fields, 5 years in, maybe something starts to click for him. Hopefully Tanner Engstrand's a good play designer, a guy who's hopefully is a good offensive architect who can build a quarterback-friendly system around Fields' strengths. You have a legitimate number one receiver in Garrett Wilson. You have a legitimate number one back in Breece Hall. But the skill groups for the Jets, it's not a strength right now. I think if we're being fair, and in order for a quarterback like Justin Fields to thrive, in order for a reclamation project type quarterback to have success, the pieces around him have to be really good. Jets skill group's not dismal. It's got pieces. This is not like the Jets of, Adam Gase, where you had nothing at the skill positions. It's not like the Jets of Todd Bowles, where you had nothing at the skill positions. You have some good high-end players there. What you lack, though, you kind of lack those supporting casts. You don't really have a great number two receiver at this point. You could argue the Jets have some decent depth at running back with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. But it's tough to say what the Jets really have in them. At the tight end position, you're probably going with a rookie. We're going to get to Mason Taylor in a little bit. So all of what this really means is that the Jets are going to need to lean on their offensive line on that side of the ball. And it's going to have to be an offensive line that, first of all, does a good job protecting Fields. That's critical because Fields, through his career, has had big games. But when he's gotten into trouble, it's been in part because he's held the ball for too long. because, he's not a guy with great pocket presence. Pocket presence means that, the little slides in the pocket, if there's pressure coming from your left, you just make a slight slide to your right, and that little piece of footwork buys you extra time for a receiver to break open. So when you have a quarterback like this, it's really critical to give him time, because you look across the league, practically every quarterback posts good stats when they're not under pressure. When every quarterback has a clean pocket, I mean, you could be the worst quarterback in the league. You're probably going to have success because you're not under duress. Your mechanics aren't going to break down. You'll have time to scan the field and find the open guy, and somebody will eventually break open. And I think the Jets have the type of offensive line where this could work, because this is an offensive line. Normally this time of year, we're trying to talk ourselves into the Jets offensive line. We're saying, well, this works and that works, and this guy maybe overperforms. It could pan out. We actually have 4 players here who have proven they can play effectively together. It's the other 4 guys: the left tackle, left guard, center, and right guard. The last missing piece was the right tackle. And of course, the Jets lost Morgan Moses this offseason to New England. As I've said on numerous occasions on this show, I have nothing but respect for Morgan Moses, a solid player, a very good locker room guy, tough guy, willing to play through injury, even last year, and what was one of the most dismal seasons an NFL team has had in recent memory, when players left and right were checking out. Morgan Moses was playing through injury in December. But a guy who's aging, a guy who got a multi-year contract at 34, I can't blame the Jets for letting him go. Of course, it's one thing to say you don't blame the Jets for failing to match a contract. It's another thing to say the player's replaced. It took until the draft for the Jets to replace Morgan Moses with Armand Membou. Now, rookies at the tackle position do struggle, even guys who are drafted high, even guys who eventually go on to have good careers. I mean, I can even give you an example. Last year, Olu Fashanu finished the season really strong. Pitched a couple shutouts. Had a couple games in November, December where he did not allow a pressure. But if you watched him early in the season when he was replacing Morgan Moses at right tackle, or even at points where the Jets moved him to guard because of injuries and how they forced the offensive line to shuffle around, he was struggling. And it wasn't until, about halfway through the season where he kind of caught his sea legs. And, you can make the argument that, he's playing his natural position at left tackle. But I think, he maybe needed to work on his technique a little bit. I think that, there were moments where he looked a little overmatched. I don't know that it was about position play. And this is true across the league. So I think that the odds are very good of Armand Membou eventually being a good player. The question is, how quickly can he learn? Because as I've mentioned on the show, these were not reasons to avoid drafting him. I do think like Membou's technique can be a little inconsistent at times, and I think that this is going to be in the court of the offensive line coach to really get him up to speed quickly. Because unlike Olu Fashanu a year ago, there is no grace period. Olu Fashanu entered a team that had Tyron Smith at left tackle and Morgan Moses at right tackle, and we knew, especially because you had Tyron Smith, who can't stay healthy, that eventually Fashanu would have to play snaps. But we also knew that it probably would not be immediately, that he would actually have some time. And despite, the fact that Jets had to throw him in a couple times because of injuries, Moses early in the season, and a couple issues at guard, Fashanu did have about halfway through the season until he had to take over the left tackle spot. Membou does not have that luxury. And he's a very important player for the Jets in 2025, because if he steps in and plays well right off the bat, this offensive line is going to be very good. And this is going to be the type of offensive line you actually can lean on to get reasonable production. And if the Jets offense plays at a decent level, there's a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. And this team could surprise you. This team, I maintain that this Jets team is not as bad as people are making them out to be. I think this Jets team is going to surprise people this year. I think the Jets are going to beat their 5.5 win over under right now that our partners at FanDuel have them at. So I think that, but a lot of this is going to rely on Armand Membou stepping in and playing effectively right off the bat. And so he's a critical player. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the second-round pick, Mason Taylor, a guy with a very famous last name, and a guy who the Jets will be counting on immediately. But how much can they get out of him? I don't know that we want to put expectations too high on him, and I'll explain why as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you use Monarch, you'll realize just how much you're spending on food delivery. Now you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We are talking today about the first couple picks the Jets made in the 2025 NFL draft and what expectations should be for them as they begin their career. Of course, it's the first draft class of Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji in charge of the New York Jets. We're hoping that this group will help turn things around for a franchise which has hit hard times over the last decade and a half. In the second round, the Jets drafted a tight end with a familiar last name. That is Mason Taylor. And the reason his last name is familiar is that he's the son of Hall of Fame defensive end Jason Taylor, a name that's a player very familiar to Jets fans because he spent most of his career with the Miami Dolphins and was a huge Jets antagonist, not just on the field, but also off the field. He had a lot of critical things to say during his career about the Jets and their fans. In fact, I think before the rise of Tom Brady, Jason Taylor was probably public enemy number one in the Jets fan base. And then ironically, he came to the Jets in 2010 and played on one of the Rex Ryan teams that went to the AFC Championship game and kind of turned his perception around in the fan base. Had a pretty decent year with the Jets in 2010. Well, now his son is joining the Jets. I think Mason Taylor is probably going to be the number one tight end on this team, and I think that says as much about the Jets tight end room as it does about Mason Taylor right now. Not to say Mason Taylor was an outrageous pick at 42, because Mason Taylor generally was viewed as as a day two pick. I don't think the Jets reached for him, but I think that he's a guy who's not a finished product right now. And I think most teams in the league, they'd be looking to turn him into a tight end one longer term. I think he'd come in, he'd be the second or third tight end to most teams, kind of limit his snaps, try and develop, coach him up so that in 2026 he can take over as tight end one. Well, that doesn't really work when you have an existing tight end room that consists of guys like Jeremy Ruckert and Stone Smart. And, no offense to Jeremy Ruckert or Stone Smart, but these are not dynamic options at the tight end position. And when you bring in a second round pick, odds are in a room like that, he's going to be the top guy. Taylor, I think, is kind of raw. I think there are lots of aspects of his game that need to be developed, in part because of the way he was utilized or not utilized at LSU. I think, he ran a fairly limited route tree in college. I think, he's a guy who's got tools. He moves really well for a guy of his size, particularly that change of direction. Usually the bigger guys, it's difficult for them to explode left or right. It usually takes some time to build up speed when you're bigger, and you don't have that immediate explosion. He moves pretty effortlessly. So there's real potential, and I think there is some craftiness to his route running. I think he's a guy who he sees where the openings are going to be, and he gives the quarterback a big target. But there are some things that are going to have to be developed in his game. I don't think he ran that diverse of a route tree in college. I think that the tempo of his routes needs to be worked on. When I say tempo, it's kind of like if you're talking about a baseball pitcher, you don't want to throw the fastball all the time, because the batters will get used to will be able to time the fastball. You want to be able to change speeds, and I think the same is true when you're route running. You kind of want to throw different tempos. You want to go slow, boom, fast, and explode past the defender. These are just little subtle things that you learn over time. And again, this is why, in an ideal world, I think he'd going somewhere and be a number two tight end. You'd try and take advantage of his athleticism, but give him an opportunity to kind of learn the nuances of route running. And I also think, he's a guy who probably needs a little bit of work developing as a blocker. He's got the frame to be an effective blocker. And I think at the tight end position, you're either big enough to be an effective blocker or you're not. Because the tight end, sometimes you're gonna have to block defensive ends one-on-one. I don't think Taylor is there yet, but I think he could get there with the right coaching if he takes to it. So I think the Jets are just kind of going to throw him out there and hope that they get good results. It's kind of a double-edged sword in these situations because you don't always get the greatest production in year one, but at the same time, you get the player valuable reps. And there's nothing, there's nothing that I think helps a player more develop than getting reps. And Mason Taylor's going to get plenty of reps. In fact, even in the passing game, there's not really a clear number two option. I think heading into the weekend, Breece Hall was probably the second most reliable receiver on the team. So, look, I don't know if Mason Taylor is a guy who you'd want to count on as your second option in the passing game right now, but he's going to get, I mean, there are targets that are going to be available for him just because there really aren't many other good options for the Jets outside of Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. And Breece is a running back. I mean, I know like some running backs, you really want to feature in your passing game. A healthy Christian McCaffrey might be one of them. I think Breece is a good receiver. I think Breece is a threat out of the backfield, but I don't know that Breece Hall is the type of guy by design that you want to be one of your leading receivers. So all of this is going to lead to opportunities for Mason Taylor. And the question is, how much can he produce this year? And the other question is, what will this lead to long term? And I think it's one of those situations where people might be putting a little expectations that are a little too high on him. This always happens when the Jets draft somebody on day two and people expect it to be dominant right away. What I'd like for Mason Taylor to be is look like a guy who belongs. A guy who puts up credible numbers at the tight end position. Maybe a Tyler Conklin type season where he makes plays. I think it's a little bit much to ask for him to be like a dominant player. I think it's a little bit much to ask for him to be a plus starter at the position, but I'd like to see an upward trajectory for Taylor as we go through the season. I like to see him get better on a week-to-week basis. I'd like to see the route running get more refined each week. I'd like to see the blocking continue to improve as we progress from September to October to November to December to January. It's in an ideal world, he'd be a second tight end. I think like if he stepped in, the odds are he'd be an excellent number two tight end right off the bat, and a guy who could grow into a number one tight end role. With the Jets, again, it's kind of a little bit of the expression baptism by fire. He's going to be thrown right in there. The Jets are going to give him opportunities right off the bat. And it's the type of thing, and this is kind of like goes into why I said the offensive line so important and drafting Armand Membou was so important. You're relying on a rookie tight end. And despite what Brock Bowers did last year, despite, some of the other successes rookies have had, it's not easy. It's not an easy position to transition to in this league. There are outliers, there are exceptions, but I think Taylor, the thing with Taylor is that he's got talent, but he wasn't really asked to do in college what he's going to be asked to do in the NFL. And I think that's really where you have to limit your expectations as a rookie. I think he's going to make plays. I think he's going to get opportunities. I think he's going to make plays. I think he's going to produce. I think down the line, he's got a shot to be a very good starter in this league. I don't think that that's necessarily a fair thing to put on him in year one, because there's so many things he's going to do that he hasn't done in the past. If you look typically across the league, the tight ends that succeed as rookies, and there aren't many of them, they're the guys who are generally being asked to do the same thing that they did in college. I think for Taylor, it's going to be a little bit different, but it's again the benefits in the long run, because he's going to get a lot of reps this year, and sometimes those reps, even if you're you're just kind of okay as a rookie, they kind of teach you how to play. And then in year two, you're really able to take off. Here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the player the Jets drafted in the third round. It is a cornerback, and it was a pick that raised some eyebrows because cornerback was not viewed as one of the biggest needs on the Jets roster. And for the player the Jets drafted, this year is going to be all about development. And that's not a bad thing. I'll explain why as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Because right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. NBA playoffs have been exciting this year. I was expecting them to be exciting. They certainly have been. Whether your team's in it or your team didn't make it or your team's been eliminated, FanDuel gives you a chance to get in on the action, betting your favorite player props. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Again, it's FanDuel.com to claim your $250 in bonus bets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're taking a look at the players the Jets drafted early in the 2025 NFL draft and trying to figure out what the Jets are going to expect from them as rookies. I think it was a bit of a surprise on Friday night when the Jets drafted Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. And I think a lot of that has to do with the position he plays, cornerback, which is not a position that seemed like a big need heading into the night. You could be skeptical of Brandon Stevens. I'll be honest with you. When the Jets signed Brandon Stevens from Baltimore this offseason, I was a little bit of a skeptic on that one. But I don't think anybody went in feeling like the Jets were going to invest big at the corner position, because we have Sauce Gardner, who is due a big contract. I mean, I think in the weeks ahead, it's very likely Sauce Gardner is going to get a contract extension. I think the Jets have kind of been putting off the contract extensions for Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson until after the draft, because you get so much going on around the draft. You got to build your board. You got to figure out like what prospects you're interested in. You got to have all these meetings with the scouting department. You don't have time to deal with player extensions. And before that, you got free agency. You got the combine. This is the point where you get contract extensions done. So I would expect Sauce Gardner to get a big contract extension in the next few weeks. Jets already paid Brandon Stevens a pretty big deal this offseason. They paid Michael Carter II a big contract last season. So Jets have two high-priced corners and one who's about to become a mega star paid corner, a guy who's going to get maybe the biggest corner contract in the league in Sauce Gardner. So drafting a corner, Azareye'h Thomas, in the third round, a bit of a surprise. But go back to what I said about Mason Taylor. They're kind of putting Azareye'h Thomas into the situation that you'd want to put somebody like Mason Taylor in, where a bit of a developmental guy, but a guy with potential and a guy who's going to be in a role that will suit him. He'll be the number 4 corner this year for the Jets. He'll be a primary backup on the outside. He'll maybe see some spot duty in dime situations when the Jets need to put six defensive backs on the field. So, if the other team puts 4 receivers on the field, he'll take on number 4 receivers. And, for a third round pick, I think, you would hope he could hold up against the number 4 receiver just fine. And he'll learn on the practice field. And, you hope Sauce Gardner maybe takes him under his wing a little bit, shows him how to play press coverage. This is very much an Aaron Glenn type of corner. Aaron Glenn likes to play man coverage. He likes to play press man coverage. Press man coverage is when you are lined up directly across from the guy at the line of scrimmage, and you are looking to use your arms to disrupt his routes, because routes are really precise in the NFL. A guy has to be at a certain spot on the field. Can't be a yard off. It has to be a certain spot on the field in 2.5 seconds to get that ball. So if you're a good press corner, you can throw him off. You hit him and he loses his balance and he's not at that spot. You completely disrupt the timing of the passing game. A good jam at the line of scrimmage can lead to an incompletion. And this is in contrast to off coverage, where you're just playing off. You're kind of looking to explode on the ball. Aaron Glenn likes to play press man coverage. And Azareye'h Thomas is the type of corner who profiles as a good press man corner, because he got long arms. So again, you're trying to use your arms to disrupt somebody, throw him off his route. And really the biggest issue with him was he did not run a fast 40-yard dash. And Aaron Glenn addressed this after the draft. He talked about this in a press conference. He mentioned that, his 40 time may not have been good, but if you watch him play, he plays faster. And that's one of the things about the draft is, you always hear about the 40 time, but sometimes guys play faster than their 40 time. Sometimes guys play slower. You have to remember that when you're on a football field, you're not running it like a track and field athlete. You're not like in the blocks out of a 4-point stance, firing 40 yards in a straight line. You're wearing pads. You're typically, if you're playing corner, you're not starting with your hands on the ground, and you're changing direction. So, some guys play faster than they're timed in the 40. And I think the Jets believe Azareye'h Thomas is one of those guys. The other thing the Jets liked is this is an interesting one. The Jets liked that he played on a bad team last year. And that's kind of like an interesting point. And the theory behind it is that, a lot of guys come from winning college teams, which is not a bad thing in and of itself. But you enter the NFL and you're not used to losing. And you have to be able to respond to losing in the NFL, because, there's only been one team in the entire history of the league that's gone through a season undefeated and non-tied. So you have to know how to bounce. It's not that you feel good about losing, but you have to know how to bounce back from losing. You can't get used to losing, but the ability to shrug off failure is a good thing. And the Jets liked how Azareye'h Thomas dealt with that at Florida State. It was an incredibly difficult season for his college team. Really the focus for Azareye'h Thomas. I mean, obviously his most tangible role is to be the number 4 corner, but I think what the Jets are looking for is for him to develop on the practice field and for him to like really get the technique down of playing press man coverage at the line of scrimmage. Because as I mentioned, Jets are going to have a very expensive corner room going forward, with Sauce Gardner about to get a mega deal and Brandon Stevens making decent money and Michael Carter II having a pretty big contract at the slot corner spot. And Sauce Gardner, you hope he's going to be a Jet for the most of his productive career. Michael Carter II, a homegrown player, is a really high caliber player. It would be nice if the Jets could move on for Brandon Stevens sooner rather than later. And this is the thing: is you've got to hit on some of these picks. You only get one first round pick a year, and you're in a league with a salary cap, so you can't pay big money at every position. And every player you hit on in the draft, especially round 2 and beyond, is a real benefit to your team, because these are guys who are not making much money their first 4 years in the league. These are guys who who are kind of they come cost controlled. So if those guys can produce for you, it's a big advantage, because the money that you'd go to paying Brandon Stevens can go improve another spot on your team. So this year, Brandon Stevens is going to be a starter, but in the long run, year 2, year 3, I think Brandon Stevens is probably going to be on the team next year because of the way the deal was structured. But 2 years down the line, if the Jets have the ability to move on from Brandon Stevens because Azareye'h Thomas has stepped into a starting role, and that's a real positive for the Jets, because then the money that's going to Brandon Stevens can improve another part of the team. And this is what you're looking for. You don't want to be in a position where the Jets are in with their first and second round picks. So the first and second round picks kind of have to start because there's nobody else there. Where you'd rather be is in a position where they can kind of ease their way into the league, where they have the opportunity to kind of sit on the bench and learn low pressure situation, maybe take some low leverage snaps, Thomas going up against number 4 corners, kind of get his feet wet in the league, and then maybe gradually, as he gets used to the league, take on a bigger role. And like people are asking, why did the Jets draft a corner when they didn't need one? Well, again, this is what you're trying to find long-term players. You're trying to find a guy who can help your team in the long run. Even if he's not going to play a big role in year 1, he might play a big role year 2, year 3, year 4. And that's ultimately the goal, especially the later you get into the draft. By the time you get to the 3rd round, you're typically not dealing with many guys who are going to make an immediate impact. So Azareye'h Thomas, like the Jets want him to develop into a long-term starter. I don't know that he's going to have a big role year 1, but the Jets definitely want him to develop into a long-term starter. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody. Send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll do our weekly mailbag. Talk to you then.